Hello everyone, welcome to Chill Dill Trades, where I give you, the exclusive of everything happening in the exclusive, because I'm the only one doing this online. Not really, but I give you kind of my take on the stock market, what's going on, update you on the overall health of the market, as well as breaking down both the crypto and the stock market to give you kind of where I think things are headed or where there's some opportunity. So today we're going to talk about Cardano. I just finished up a video covering Bitcoin, so definitely go take a look at that and like and subscribe because I have more content coming. I'll be doing some updates on stocks I talked about in the past, as well as kind of continuing my updates on the crypto space. So for Cardano, I mentioned my Bitcoin video, but I think my three favorite investments right now that I think are lowest risk, even though everything's risky in the crypto space, are Cardano, Ethereum, and Bitcoin. I think these will for sure be long-term winners, or the probability that they are really high. And so Cardano is probably my favorite project. If you don't know what they do, so they're essentially have a really big supply of tokens, and they're going more after developing countries, or countries I would say outside of the U.S. and maybe other of the few developed countries in Europe, and going after Africa, Latin America, areas like that, and kind of tapping into governments and educational institutions and things like that to kind of adopt kind of their technology. And so that's a really rough and really short description of what they do and who they are. But I want to take the majority of this video to talk about the stock. And so the stock's currently at $1.50. This is 6.8. And before we jump into actually some of the technicals, the first thing I want to look at is the buying and where it's been lately. So I think what's really interesting or different about Cardano is their story. So they haven't been around as long as maybe Ethereum and Bitcoin, but the hype around them has been really big, I would say, over the last probably 6 months or less. So they were down at like 20 cents. They basically went from like 25 cents almost straight up to 100 or up to $1, and then kind of accumulated around the dollar, and then basically went up to like 250, and that's when the hype got really crazy. And so this chart I'm showing on the page kind of shows where the most buying took place. So under the current share price, most of the buying took place around this 27 cent range. These are definitely the early adopters, the people who maybe saw it coming before everybody else. And then you started seeing, the next big jump was at the dollar range, like I mentioned. And you saw, a little, smaller but still big cumulatively buys from basically the $1 to the $1.50 range. And I think the most important thing to mention here is the people who are in the positive on profit and the people who are currently negative. And so when we look at this, 69% of people are in the green, but 27% of people are in the red. And what I really want to look at is this big circle, this big red circle on the right side. And I think this is really worrisome because I think this is the largest volume of all these different price points. And so you have a lot of people who bought where the stock or where the Cardano currently is at 150. And so I think that's why we're seeing the price stay around this 150, 180 range, is because so many people bought here, both on the way up, and people are buying it right now, kind of, I guess, on the way down. And it's kind of stagnated around that price after dropping initially when Bitcoin did. But seeing all the buying here is worrisome because you have to think about kind of the psychology of these people. So these are people who bought here. They're currently negative. And with all the speculation about regulation and fears, I would say is probably affecting these traders and these investors a lot, because there's been times where, a stock is broken down. I was in a big red, decided to hold on to it. Ethereum Cardano went down to $1 at its lowest peak on this pullback, went back up, and now it's at the $1.50 range. And these people are right on the verge of profitability, or breaking even, as well as being down like 10%. And so I think the psychology in this moment is really important, because I've been in this space where I'm like, okay, do I hold it or do I sell it? And I think a lot of people are debating this right now. And because there's such a large portion of people who bought on that price, if we do break below that 150 range, we could potentially see a lot of quick volatility to the downside. And we really see like this big red circle, the next biggest red circles, 130 or 120 range. Those are the next two big buy points. And so you have to start thinking about this on the way down. Like if we push people who bought in the 117 range and the 125 range and the 150 range together, that circle is just as big as the people who bought at 150 to 180. And so now you have another big red circle of people contemplating, okay, what do? I hold it, or do I sell it, or do I buy more? And so I think this is the first factor that's going to cause a lot of impact. The next thing I want to look at is the type of people who own Cardano, which I think is really important to know. So as you see here, 75, ish% of the people are retail traders. And so as I just mentioned a second ago, where a lot of people are currently in the red, most of those people are retail traders. And we know, because I'm a retail trader, that when there's a lot of fear, people can sell things really quickly. And so I think with people being in the red, with most of the buyers being retail, this can potentially push, if we do see a lot more fear and breakdown, we could see really quick and long volatility to the downside. The last thing is kind of the change of the type of owners of Cardano over time. So, back in 2020, we saw a pretty large percentage of people being long-term holders over a year. But as time has moved on, we see more and more short-term traders buying into Cardano, which is not a good sign. Because when we see, a large percentage of that orange, which is people who typically hold under a month, that's a big negative, because if price breaks down, these people are the first to sell. And because there's more of them, that means there's going to be more volatility to the downside. So I think when we look at this, back in June, it was 50% of the people were long-term holders. Now we go in June the next year, only 9% of people are long-term holders, where the rest 90% are people who can hold 1 month, from just a few days to a year. And so this is really I think another really worrisome thing to keep in top of mind with the psychology of the type of people who own Cardano. So now that we've kind of talked about that aspect, let's go ahead and jump into the chart and kind of find the pros and cons. So I would say the first, and I would say this is the biggest pro, is we have a trend line back from January of this year. And so we see this trend line, and when we zoom in here, we haven't broke below this trend line yet. So that's a really big positive for Cardano. Not only have we not broke below this trend line yet, we also are above the 200-day. And so being above 200-day is very bullish for, I would say, at the big picture, and holding a trend line all the way from 6-7 months ago is also a really positive sign, especially when you see the price initially, and then we bounced off it once, and then on these two really big candles where it tried to break down over the last month, we saw it hit the trend line and it bounced right back up right away, which means people saw that, they felt like the price was too low at $1, and initially gobbled up all of those Cardonas that people were trying to get rid of. Those Cardonas, I don't think that's how you talk about the tokens. They bought them up right away. But now we're going to talk about some things on more the worrisome side. So I would say the first worrisome thing to me is the RSI. So on the daily, the RSI is still at 50 or 45, which to me kind of shows that if it does break down, we're still pretty far away from oversold territory. So if we do break down, that could potentially, and a lot of fear, and we just see a drastic pullback, it gives a lot of space for Cardano to break down to before we get in oversold territory. On the breakdown for Bitcoin, we saw 30K already hit the oversold range at 30 on RSI. But for Cardano, we're seeing the current price be quite a lot farther away from that oversold territory, which I think can be a negative, at least how I'm viewing it. The second thing is that we're testing the 50-day right now. And so typically you always want the stock above, I would say, the 100-day, 200-day, and 50-day. And right now we're testing the 50-day. And so we can see that it's kind of deciding what it wants to do. We have, on the 7th, or is that the 6th, I would say. I guess we're already trading on the 9th. So the 7th, it hit the 50-day and stayed there. The next day, it tried to break below, came back up to it. And now today, we're kind of showing, a breakdown below the 50-day. And so we're going to have to see what trends, what trend kind of continues here. And I think that's going to have it's going to give us a big indicator of where the stock can potentially go if it doesn't go above the 50-day. The next two things I want to look at are the trading ranges. So we have two of them here. So we have one kind of from the initial all-time high, and then we have one from a couple candles later. So I like to create multiple trading ranges to understand where all the potential resistance or supports are. And I would say one of the negatives is when you have more resistance, the more trading ranges or more downward trend lines you have, I would say the harder it is for that stock to break above it, because it doesn't have to break above one resistance, it has to break above two resistances, which is going to make it even harder for the stock to break up. And then what we see with this trading range is we hit the bottom of the trading range, consolidated, and then we moved our way back up. It always kind of huddles around that middle point of the range, and we came to the top, and it's still trying really hard to break out of the top range. That it hasn't broken out yet is not a good sign, but because it is such a because we've been testing the top of that range, we are getting close to breaking out. So if we see the bulls be able to hold Cardano around this 150 range where all that buying has taken place, then we could kind of just move sideways out of this trading range, which would be positive in breaking the downward trend. But typically with trading ranges, you want to see if it doesn't break out above, it's probably going to test the bottom again, which is not a good sign. It's either going to test the middle and come back up, or if it breaks down, it will go back down to the bottom of the range. And so let's look at some potential resistance or support lines. So if it breaks lower and we want to set some buy prices, we know where. So right now, today it tested this really important trend line at $1.50, which we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a ton of candles that couldn't break out before and now aren't breaking below. So that's extreme support at 150. And kind of like I mentioned before with where all the buying was, this is extreme support. But if it breaks 150 and stays below, then it's going to become extreme resistance, and we're probably going to see a pretty big pullback under 150 because there are so many buyers around that price range from the past. If it does break below, I would say the next positive note is we have a lot of support in the 130 to 120 range, or I would say 125. When we look at this kind of area, there's a lot of consolidation right here. There's like 4, 5, 6, 7 places. And so I would say the positives, we have a lot of support heading down, but that means that there's a lot of buyers there. So if those people end up starting to sell, then it could really push this a lot lower. If we somehow break below 125, first, buy it if it goes lower, in my opinion. But I'm not an institutional, or I'm not a financial advisor, so don't listen to me. But I would say the next really big point, which I think this stock could potentially get back to, or Cardano could potentially get back to, is this $1 range. We see a ton of support at this $1 range. We have 6 or 7 really big candles that hit that $1 range and right away went back up. So we saw it right here twice where it tried to get down to this $1 range, and then people just ate it up right away. It went right back up. Those long wicks is showing that there's a lot of support down there. So I would say $1, in my opinion, is around the bottom I think Cardano will get to, unless we have some crazy fear that takes over the crypto space. Then we also have a lot of support around the 80-cent range. And if somehow we break lower than that, then it's 60 cents and all the way back down to 40 cents. But these are things just to keep a look at, to keep an eye on, to kind of see where Cardano could be heading in the future. But yes, I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you got something valuable from this. If you did, please like and subscribe. I have more videos coming. Go back and watch the Bitcoin video that I put out. I think it has a lot of good information in it. And I'll also be putting out the video on Ethereum. And the Ethereum chart looks very similar to Cardano. But thanks again for watching, and I appreciate you, and I'll see you again soon.